Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China's clean energy exports, such as solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles, are helping the world to avoid 1% of global CO2 emissions in total, and will avoid some 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide over the lifetimes of the products. The data comes from a new report by the UK-based climate think tank Carbon Brief. So how is China advancing its clean energy efforts? How is it striking a balance between ambitious green goals and continued economic growth? And could China's green development model offer fresh lessons for countries to decarbonize quickly? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Lauri Myllyvirta, Senior Fellow at Asia Society Policy Institute, and he's also co-founder of Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. Changhua, President of Global Climate Academy, and Dimitri de Boer, Director for China of ClientEarth. Welcome to Dialogue. Well, Lauri, you actually penned this piece about China's export in 2024. Last year, the clean energy products, which avoided 1% of global CO2 emissions, and 1.2% actually, if you include overseas manufacturing and projects. So how is these numbers, calculated? What made you guys to think of do such a report?
There's been a lot of talk about China's overseas investments in different types of energy projects, both clean and fossil fuel based. And I've been for a long time making the point that the exports of products are the much bigger factor in the global energy picture. And so in the past couple of years, these exports grew in a very impressive way. So I wanted to use the customs data, the data on trade between countries to quantify this. And so the research looks at the impact of equipment that is exported from China, looks at manufacturing of clean energy products overseas, and also investments by Chinese firms into power generation projects overseas to put numbers on basically China's global clean energy footprint and understand China's role in the global energy transition.
China's role in the global energy transition. Changhua, in order to produce this clean energy tech in China, China released like 110 million tons of CO2 last year. But the global use of these technologies offset the amount in less than a year. And, it's projected that these technologies made in China could actually cut 40 billion tons of global CO2, as we said, over the course of their lifetime use of these technologies. So, I mean, how is this happening, let's say, inside China?
It's a simple math. I think, first of all, really appreciate Lauri's leadership and the team to put things in perspective, particularly putting data, evidence, and information behind the story. I think the message is very, very clear and very strong, and put things in perspective that China has been leading global clean energy transformation, not only domestically, but really supporting other countries, particularly developing countries, to accelerate, embrace clean energy transition, so that on one side to dramatically enhance their access to clean energy, but in the meantime help grapple climate mitigation challenge, which means avoid or reduce the carbon emissions there. Now, as we all know, as the report mentioned as well, and China sits, at the upstream, and we, bearing all the carbon emissions duties or responsibilities by producing critical minerals, manufacturing those equipments and products, and very importantly, selling to other countries. So there is carbon emissions there, particularly because China today, if you look at the energy structure, we still rely heavily on coal as well. So the emissions are pretty high, even though the numbers tell us very strongly, basically saying, yes, of course, China continues to emit more emissions. But in the meantime, actually, we are contributing to the global clean energy transition. But we do need to come down to put things in perspective, contextualizing the numbers there, meaning globally, we are living in a climate crisis. If you look at this 1.5 degrees target, we are embracing the Paris Agreement. We have barely 3 years to go to exceed the carbon budget. There is a tremendous sense of urgency, emergency in a way, for China somehow to reduce as quickly as possible the emissions. Of course, we need to achieve peaking, then quickly, dramatically, drop the emissions as quickly as possible in order to make sure globally together we'll be able to somehow still manage to control the climate temperature rising risk under 1.5 degrees Celsius there. So it's a complicated story. So on one side, there are very positive signals, messagings there, but in the meantime, we're still living in a very, very challenging time in terms of how to grapple with climate change as quickly as possible, as much powerful capability as possible.
Dimitri, you are also in China. Many have pointed the finger at the same time, at China's increase of the building of coal-fired plants there. On one hand, you have rapid progress in the production of clean energy, clean products. At the same time, people say you are also producing more emissions there. What's the explanation? What is the reasoning behind that?
Well, as you said, China is super important when it comes to the climate transition. China is both the largest emitter, accounting for about 1/3 of global emissions. And of course, it's also by far the largest producer of green technologies. And I think that latter part is really important because in order to address climate change, we have to move away from fossil fuels, but we still need energy. So green energy is really the solution. It's the key. And so the cost coming down, the production volumes coming up, the quality increasing, that is the best news for the world in the last 10 years. And so I think China will really be the solution and provide those solutions for China itself and also for other developing countries. And that's also what this report is showing. Next year, that number is going to be more than 1%. And in 5 years, it's going to be even more. And so as we go into the future, this green energy is going to replace the fossil fuel emissions of the world and save us from the climate disaster.
We'll come back and talk more about what China is doing in terms of its efforts for energy transition. But Lauri, China's clean energy exports, of course, and investment also are projected to cut emissions by 3% in sub-Saharan Africa and 4.5% in Middle East, North Africa or MENA area, well above this global average of 1%. What's special about these regions?
Sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East, North Africa are, of course, regions where energy demand is growing fast, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa from a low base. And one important factor has been that the electricity systems are not reliable in quite a few countries as they are. So there's been an interest from consumers directly to buy solar panels so that they have electricity when grid electricity is down, or to reduce the use of diesel if they have to rely on their own generators. So in that sense, conditions have been ripe, and it's been really the massive reduction in the costs of solar panels and now batteries that has enabled consumers in those markets to start buying solar panels and now starting to complement them with batteries. It's the same story with EVs. China has used its domestic market to bring down the costs of EVs and to make them more attractive to consumers. Pretty much everyone these days who has driven a new EV says that it's just a much better car. So making these products accessible and attractive to consumers is a huge part of the story, and that's where China has been playing a crucial role, and that of course gives hope that these countries that are now just building their power system and energy system can move directly to cleaner technologies and without making compromises between economic development and clean development, but rather clean development being the fastest way and most effective way to economic development.
I think in South Asia, in particular Pakistan, that's also the case, right? And the country usually or used to suffer from the power shortages there.
Yeah, absolutely. The two countries that really stood out in the data, South Africa and Pakistan, are ones that were having an electricity crisis just as the massive expansion of solar power manufacturing was taking place in China. So that's those are countries where a lot of consumers were just desperate to have electricity, and Chinese solar panels provided a part of the solution.
Changhua, if you look at China, people wonder, what's the China's overall grand plan for energy transition? On one hand, you need to develop or continue to grow your economy. You have to create jobs, and especially in the past years, poverty alleviation, the priority. At the same time, you have a problem of pollution, serious pollution issues, climate change issues there. So the Chinese leader mentioned this phrase very popular in China: lucid waters and large mountains are invaluable assets. That was proposed 20 years ago in 2005. In a sense, it has redefined ecological protection as a core economic asset rather than a growth constraint. So what's the overall plan for China, over the past years? What the country has been doing to basically strike the balance, grow your economy at the same time to achieve the clean energy upgrade there?
Well, China definitely has been doing a lot. As the numbers, evidence, data, we're talking about it here today, we are seeing the, milestones by now so far. And looking back, tracing back the last 2 decades in particular, it is an integrated national strategy story. And meaning at the nationally, we all embraced the ecological civilization and literally use that as the national guiding strategy to guide how we plan to transform or greening our economy, our energy system, our infrastructure, even down to corporate level, project level, product level. Well, and in that context, particular to address the decarbonization element, because we committed to the Paris Agreement, like capping our emissions before 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality before 2060. In order to achieve the decarbonization target there, we definitely need to green our energy system. That's a major agenda. The government has rolled out. So nationally, we focus on the national targets, goals, aligned not with only domestically, but also global Paris Agreement, global commitment there as well. Then we focus on policy incentives for technology innovation. That's why you started to see something we call like emerging, new emerging technologies, renewable energy there, not only energy, renewable energy, but also energy system, EVs, batteries, digital parts as well. So in an integrated manner, we focus on the technology. Then we incentivize to build in, industrial value chains. We financing actually as greening supply chain as well. And then at the end of the day, of course, we incentivize market deployment. So from national strategy, supply to the demand to the industrial value chain. So it's a whole system sort of shift. China has demonstrated that green, sustainable development is about green technology, green industry, green infrastructure, green products, green services, you name it, literally putting green at the core of the national development strategy. I think China has demonstrated, presented a very strong global prototype for others to see why China has achieved, all those successes so far. But in the meantime, we all need to recognize we're still in a transition towards a more sustainable future, particularly addressing fossil fuel issues, pollution issues, value chain issues, waste issues, as well as land use, nature issues. So those elements will be brought together into the system so that we'll be able to address them along the way.
Well, Dimitri, even with all the progress in clean energy, heavy industries in China like steel, cement, and chemicals still account for around 60% of China's CO2 emissions. How is China going to deal with these sectors?
Well, it's another 35 years between now and 2060 for carbon neutrality. So there's some time to decarbonize the economy. A lot of these sectors can be done in more efficient ways, and sometimes production processes can be changed in order for them to have much fewer emissions or even no emissions to electrify these processes. And in many ways, that's also modernization of these industries. So what you're seeing today, the situation in China is that the economy is still being stimulated. There is also a situation of some overcapacity in certain sectors. And so potentially it's time now to have another round of phasing out some of the most polluting or outdated or old-fashioned production processes, which will then reduce pollution and emissions coming from those, let's say, less efficient heavy industries. And at the same time, we're already seeing a lot of success in the green sectors that are now driving the growth in the economy. And so this green transition is it's happening at the same time as economic growth and stimulating the economy, which is quite impressive.
You mentioned one word, electrify. Some say China is the first country to electrify, the manufacturing, basically everything here, electrification state. Tell us more on that.
Well, electrifying, so a lot of industrial processes used to be done with burning coal directly on site, so or cokes. So for steel making or any process that requires heat, in the past, coal would be the normal source of energy to provide that heat. And so as the economy electrifies and renewable energy is being deployed everywhere, there's an opportunity also to electrify. So electric vehicles are a very good example as well. They don't burn the fossil fuel, they consume electricity instead. And so the more the economy electrifies, the easier it actually becomes to absorb variable renewable energy sources into the grid.
Well, Changhua, we know that China is starting the construction of the world's largest hydropower dam, Yaluzambu River there. So it's estimated to produce, 3 times the output of the Three Gorges Dam right now. So how does that, project fit into the overall transition, overall efforts, to fight climate change?
The story is simple and clear. Hydropower definitely has been and will continue to be a very important part of the clean energy transformation. And so Yaluzambu, the new power plant, the giant actually, is going to be another step forward. So yes, it will definitely contributing to China's decarbonization of its energy system domestically, but also I think the plan is also linking that power generation capability with some other countries, neighboring countries there as well, to help a few other countries, neighboring countries, to address the access to clean energy challenges there. Now, there is the other side, which is about the ecological impact as well as the overall situation about water security, because we are living in the age of fast or much accelerated glaciers melting age. So at this moment, I think that remains to be a question on the table, and for China and other neighboring countries in particular, to really have a candid conversation and figuring out, get the data, information, facts as out there as transparent as possible, so that we'll be able to gain more support and the endorsement of other neighboring countries in order to make sure on one side we do need to address decarbonization agenda, clean energy transition, but in the meantime we do need to take into consideration the ecological impact as well as the water security challenge for the region.
Lauri, in your report, you mentioned about some of the facts, of course, in tariffs from the US, from European countries on Chinese clean tech. But of course, they are welcome in the rest of the world, basically Africa, Middle East, Asia, etc. You also you talk about the investment, actually, interesting, financing of those production, manufacturing of these clean technologies, actually from non-Chinese investors or Western investors here. Tell us some more about this. This picture is kind of twisted here. It's interesting. Tell us more on that.
Yeah, the big picture is most of the exports of solar panels, for example, from China, are used in projects that are developed locally, financed locally, or by other international players and so on. So China's role is much bigger in equipment production than it is in project development overseas. And there are a few different implications from that. One of them is, of course, that most of the economic value of those projects is also captured in the recipient countries. And this is one important aspect to keep in mind, because there's been so much focus on the upstream manufacturing that it's easy to forget that most of the economic value is downstream, and even more so when you take into account things like operation and maintenance for the lifetime of the projects. But just for the cost of a solar plant, the panels themselves will make up about 1/4 of the total investment cost. So in that sense, economic value is spread much more widely than the upstream manufacturing. And there's, of course, concern not just in Europe and the US, but also, for example, in India, about the concentration of supply chains in China. And I think it's there are of course reasons for that concern that are not justifiable. It's clear that it's being used as a way of slowing down clean energy development by fossil fuel interests, but it's also a legitimate concern, because it's important that the supply chains for these crucial technologies are robust and diverse and so on. And this is an area where Chinese producers could work together with other countries, and are already working with other countries to set up manufacturing in those regions. That's one way of mitigating the risk. The other thing that I would say is for those countries that want to see more diverse supply chains, we need a lot more than 1% per year of emissions avoided. So we need to be reducing global emissions several percent per year, and we need to cover all of the growth in global energy demand. So you shouldn't be looking at this as thinking China has captured a major role in the current market, but you should be asking, okay, so what is this market going to look like in 15 years if we're successful with the global energy transition? And the answer is it's going to be several times bigger. And so you should be thinking about capturing market share in that future market, and not complaining about what China is doing now, developing more supply, developing more offerings, rather than thinking about it as a fixed buy. And tariffs alone will not generate that supply. So you need active industrial policy, just as China has had to do that.
Changhua, of course, there's, we know, like from the US, 100% tariff on the Chinese EVs, basically, zero export to the US market. Some tariffs from the European Union market on China in the European Union. So probably that will reduce the export to the market there. But in the global south, in other parts of the world, there's a kind of booming development of either investment or production of Chinese EVs, for example, solar panels, etc. If it comes to the EVs, for example, what will be the impact, globally? Say a few years back from now, on the U.S. is still focusing on, say, fossil fuel and the traditional cars there. The two largest economy, they have important impact on the rest of the world. What will it be if you look at the picture?
If the two largest economies in the world continue to be stuck in the sort of, we call it a tariff or trade tension landscape, that's really unfortunate for global community, for this whole planet, because as we all know, even in the US, transportation accounts about 30%, a third actually of the total US emissions of carbon, and globally, transportation emissions also account for a large part of the global emissions. And transportation mobility happens to be one of the top sectors that we need to address, decarbonizing as quickly as possible. Now, in reality, we all know solutions exist, particularly demonstrated by China's clean energy transformation or clean energy revolution process, and with the capacity of industrializing battery technologies, electric vehicle technologies, and turning technologies into products at a more affordable, high quality sort of product that can be deployed actually on the market to address those issues there. If we will continue to be stuck in the space of tariffs, so-called subsidies investigation or cross-border adjustment, we will be stuck already today. The transition pace is already slowed down dramatically because the current situation, the current tariffs situation, because of the CBAM and other barriers there, we call it even green trade tensions factors there, which is really unfortunate because it put all the things into the bigger context about the global climate change crisis there. We are already lagging behind. We need to hurry up and scaling up, accelerating the pace of clean energy transition, but somehow, all those factors actually holding the progress backward, which is unfortunate. So hopefully somehow, large economies in particular will be able to sit together, put more rationality on the table, really putting the global health, ecological health, in their mind, so that we'll be able to figure out how to build more win-win synergy situation, so that rather than being stuck in the zero game, we'll be able to find, somehow some collaborative partnership to create a much bigger pie. As we are talking about here today, green, clean energy technology infrastructure is pretty much the core of how our future economy infrastructure will look like. China is already stepping up into that space, and definitely there's still a long way to go. And very importantly, we need largest economies, US, China, EU, among others, to work very closely in order to accelerate that process.
With that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.